Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second night of my Facebook Live summer series. I'm very excited about tonight's topic. It's a big topic about guided reading versus strategy groups, and we're going to dive into it in just a minute. But before I talk about that, I want to give you just a few minutes to hop on the call if you're joining me live. Let me just remind you of the topics that are coming up in the next few weeks here. We have a couple of really great topics next week that I'll be discussing. I'll be talking about differentiated spelling, and we're going to talk about the difference between traditional spelling and differentiated spelling. And I'm also going to be talking about leveling readers and how you can level the texts that you have in your classroom now, even if they're not leveled. So feel free to say hello to me if you're just joining. I see, hi, Lindsay. You said hello. There's a little delay in when you make a comment and when I actually see it. So if I don't say anything back right away, it's because I haven't seen it yet. Yeah, so 2 days ago, not yesterday, 2 days ago, we did this topic. We talked about what best practice really means. And I broke down what best practice is. I gave you some free resources. So if you wanted to check that out, you can see all of these pages here. These pages are actually included in my last Facebook Live. You'll get a link to them if you'd like to download them. Here's the last one that I did. I laminated this, and to figure out if a strategy was best practice or not, I answered these 12 questions. And if I got 10 yeses, then I knew I was using a best practice strategy. So you can check that post out on my Facebook page. If you just scroll down, you'll see it there. So, but today's topic, hello everybody. I see you saying hello. Hi, Amanda from Australia. Hello from Chicago. Look at that snazzy microphone. I know, isn't this cool? I mean, I feel like I could wait, I'm channeling some Britney. No, it's not happening. Just kidding. I wish. But anyways, let me get into today's topic. And again, just like all my other Facebook Lives, I am going to be giving you all of these notes that I've written, and I've got a couple other pages I want to give you tonight as well. It needs glitter. Lindsay, I know. Oh my gosh, I could bedazzle it. That would be amazing. It probably needs a name too. All right, so welcome if you're just joining the webinar, or not the webinar. I have a webinar in an hour, so I have a webinar in my brain. But the Facebook Live, welcome if you're just joining. So tonight's topic is a big one, like I said. It's about guided reading versus strategy groups, when to do them, what to do, and all that jazz. So I thought when I was doing my research, how cool it would be if I looked back at the history of guided reading, because we all have heard the term. If you're a teacher, you probably have heard the words guided reading before. Whether you use this or not in your classroom, you've heard it before. And when I did some research, I found some really fascinating stuff about guided reading. Check this out. Emmett Betts in the 1940s published this book called Foundations of Reading Instruction. And he stressed the need to provide students with direct instruction in the area of reading. So in the 40s, he was revolutionizing teaching reading by thinking of the idea that we should provide direct instruction for reading. At that time, that was something that wasn't being done at all. So he started thinking this way. And he highlighted 4 principles in his theory and in his book that he wrote in the 1940s. And actually, I believe the book was finished in 1946. But he said, number 1, that we need to prepare students for reading instruction. Number 2, that they need to be doing silent reading after they read aloud. So they should read aloud and then they should read silently. This is what he said. And number 3, that rereading should be done for a new purpose, either silent or out loud. Every time you reread, you should be rereading for something new. And his 4th thing was, he said that follow-up activities should be there to meet the needs and interests of students. So he didn't call it guided reading at the time, but it sort of started the idea of guided reading back in the 1940s. Isn't that cool? And then in 1957, a book came out written by Gray and Reese called Teaching Children to Read. And in this book, it supported Betts' work, and then it termed the phrase guided reading. So the phrase guided reading actually came in the 50s. And the authors suggested a teaching method in the sense that you would ask a major motivating question about the text to your students. And then you would ask other questions to guide the students through the story. And then you would answer the motivating question at the end. That was their idea of guided reading in the 50s. Pretty cool to know the history behind how guided reading happened. And then let me scroll to my next slide here. Let me take this down. I got to remember where I'm at. This is tricky. There we go. Oop, I didn't take my other one down. We don't want to do that. Let me take that one down there, and then you can see it better. Oop, wrong one still. I'm learning this new technology, so thanks for bearing with me. This is the one I want. Okay, so then in every decade since the 50s, top reading educators, they re-emphasize the ideas surrounding guided reading in books that they publish. So you can look back. I did all this research, and you can look back in books that have been published since the 50s. There's been support in the idea of teaching with a guided reading strategy. And then in 1990, Margaret Mooney published a book called Reading to, by, and with Students. And she argued that guided reading was a way for students to accomplish reading achievements that would never happen if the teacher were just standing in front of the classroom reading a book. We can probably all agree that it's much more powerful for our students to receive direct instruction from us than to have us simply at the front of the room reading a book to the whole class and not talking about it at all, right? So she figured all this out in the 90s. And then Fountas and Pinnell came along. We all know Fountas and Pinnell. And they further revolutionized the idea of guided reading in 1996 when they published the book, Guided Reading, Good First Teaching for All Students. And this is when the shift was really made with the idea of guided reading as being an instructional technique to use with your small groups into a way of actually defining what happens in your small group instruction. So I know this probably can be boring to some people, but I find it absolutely fascinating. And even though the first 50 years, the last 50 years have highlighted really effective guided reading strategies, a lot of classrooms over those 50 years weren't really implementing guided reading in the correct way or in the most appropriate way. I don't know about you, but if you remember those infamous 3 reading groups, like the high risers, the middle kids, and then the low ones, for me, I remember those groups because they were labeled those bluebirds, the robins, and the crows. I was a crow, y'all. You know, I was totally a crow. I remember feeling the stigma of not being a good reader because I was in that group. I don't know if you remember all this in the 80s and 90s, but it was definitely prevalent in my school. And a lot of the guided reading at that time was teacher directed, kind of round robin oral reading, followed by a set of really literal questions that the students had to ask straight from the text. So the issues weren't with the idea of guided reading, rather that the teaching practices that fell within the process of teaching guided reading. And I think that's where a lot of people can get caught up in misconceptions about guided reading because they're used to those old processes and they don't realize that there are different techniques within guided reading that you can use that are really great practices. So that's a lot about the history of guided reading. Now let me flip my screen, my slide here, see if I can do this right the first time, and take you to the big shift in guided reading. I didn't do it right, did I? No, there we go. There we go. Okay, so in the guided reading, there was this big shift that happened. And in the past, guided reading was simply putting your kids in an ability level group. And then they would stay in that group forever. And I think that's how I was always the crow. And I always ended up being like known as a poor reader because I was in that group and I wore that label. And so there's this stigma that gets developed. And guided reading has moved from that. It used to be a transmission model, and now it's a transaction model. Transmission means that the teacher presented information, presented knowledge, and the student's job was to learn that knowledge. And that was it, the end. It was the teacher had all the information, the students had to learn it, that was it. That's what's called transmission. So that information was delivered in a guided reading group in that way. But then there was the shift made to a more transaction approach where the teacher provides different situations and the students gain knowledge through very active, non-passive ways. So they're very actively involved in their learning then, more of a constructivist approach. So instead of simply pouring knowledge into the students, the teachers assist students in connecting their new learning with their previous knowledge and experience learning. So transaction model is being a guide. Think of transaction as being a guide. And if you hear the word guide, you can't help but hear the word guided reading. So it really does go hand in hand there. That's where it's supposed to be at. All right, let me get to my next slide. I'm going to get to strategy groups in a minute. I'll pull that one down first. There we go. I'm getting the hang of this. Getting the hang of it. So my next slide is, what is guided reading? I'm going to talk about what I think guided reading is. And remember, you're getting all of these slides for free. I'm going to just give them a download to you. It'll be a Google Drive. You can print them off and they're yours to keep. So this is what I think guided reading is. Number one, it's about guiding students to develop a network of strategies that all work together to deeply understand the meaning in the text that they read. Reading is all about meaning, and we want our students to develop as many networks of strategies or as many skills that they can add to their network of strategies to be solid readers. Number two, it's about guiding students to read more productively and more intensely. So they're really focused. We're teaching them to be really focused on the words and the thinking behind those words as they read. And that's what guided reading helps us do. Number three, guided reading is about teaching at the point of need. So we're teaching at the student's instructional level, wherever they are in an instructional level. Instructional level means not what they can already do independently on their own, but one step above that, where we're going to be challenging them a little bit. The teacher engages the students in text discussions. So you're having conversations that are led by the teacher, not always led by the teacher, but a lot of times they're initiated by the teacher. And the teacher can make teaching points after reading that he or she knows are relevant teaching points to that group and their needs. It's fast-paced, it's productive, you get in and you get out, basically. And the number one goal of guided reading is to teach our students to read for meaning, because reading is all about meaning. We read to understand. So really teaching them how they can read for meaning is what we want to do in guided reading. Now let's look at strategy grouping. Strategy grouping has a lot of overlap, but there are some things that are a little bit different. And my next slide I'll show you, you'll really get to see that. But in a strategy group, small groups are focused on practicing almost always one comprehension skill, one strategy as a reader. And it might not be comprehension, it might be a fluency strategy and something, vocabulary strategy. It's short-term grouping based on their individual need. So whatever their fluency need is or their comprehension need, that group usually all has that same type of need and they get together. Again, like guided reading, it's fast-paced, it's productive. I like to use this little analogy where you model, read, question, think, share. That's how I think about strategy grouping. So you're going to model, the teacher's going to model, the kids are going to read, you're going to question, you're going to think together, you're going to share. That's kind of what happens in a strategy group. It's very purposeful because you're covering a targeted need, and it's often meeting that need immediately following you observing that the need exists. And the main goal is practicing a specific strategy for reading that can be mastered and added to their network of strategies. So that's really what a strategy group is. Now, let me put us side by side and compare the two for you here. This is a really helpful chart that you're going to get. I'm working with two screens right now too, so bear with me if I'm going a little slow. Let me just explain here. On guided reading, the students are going to be using an unfamiliar text. It's usually a cold read, and it's going to be at their instructional level. But in a strategy group, the text could be a familiar text to them already. Maybe it's a mentor text that you've read to the class already the week before, the day before, a month before, 2 months before, and you know that text is going to be a great one to use in an example in your strategy group. You can pull that text to use as a mentor text. Another thing, every student in the group during guided reading has the same text that they're working with in guided reading. You always have the same text that you're looking at. But in a strategy group, it doesn't have to be the same text. I don't know if you've tried it with different texts, but because you're focusing on a specific skill, say understanding characters, every student can bring a book that they're reading on their own to the strategy group, because if it's a fictional story, it's going to have characters in it. So they can have different books with them, and that's okay. It can be the same book, but it can be different as well. In a guided reading group, the groupings are short-term and they're based on reading levels, where in a strategy group, the groupings are really short-term, maybe even just for a day, and they're based on students who struggle with a specific reading skill. So you could have some kids in a strategy group that are reading on grade level. You could have some that are reading above grade level and some that are reading below grade level, but they all are struggling with this one strategy. And that's why it's okay that they have their own books to bring with them in the strategy group, because they'll still be working at their instructional levels, but you're talking about a specific skill, if that makes sense, hopefully. And then number 4, in a guided reading group, during the introduction of guided reading, the teacher gives usually an overview of the main idea. Usually she or he debugs any words that she or he knows the group is going to struggle with, and often mentions a typical reading skill that they might talk about at the end. In a strategy group, when you begin a strategy group, usually the teacher sets a purpose right away for the meeting. The teacher will say, boys and girls, we're meeting together today because I noticed as you were reading, or I noticed during the mini lesson, that you may be struggling with this skill, and I wanted to quickly meet with you to talk about it a little bit more. So you set the purpose. Let them know why you're meeting with them in that strategy group. Because your strategy groups are going to be different every day based on your kids. You're going to be making moment-to-moment decisions with them in strategy groups. Who you're going to pull when and where. So there's no like, this group is always in this strategy group and this group is always in this strategy group. So you want to tell them right when they come to you why they're meeting with you. Number 5, in guided reading, there's often this standalone lesson. You prepare a separate guided reading lesson that's appropriate for the readers at that level. And in a strategy group, the teacher often reteaches whatever happened just in the whole group lesson and models a skill first. So it's followed up with a recent whole group lesson. So a lot of times you'll have this mini lesson in your whole group and you've noticed a handful of kids really did not understand it. So you just pull them for a strategy group right away and you reteach that lesson that you did with your whole class. You just reteach it again, maybe grab a different book to help add a little bit more examples with it. And you think aloud a little bit longer with them until they latch on to the idea. So that's kind of what a strategy group is and how it's a little different. They're both the same. Hi, I'm seeing your comments as you post. So keep saying hello to me. If you have questions, feel free to ask questions too. If I don't see them right away, I definitely look at them when I'm done. So I've got a lot of things going on behind the scenes, so it's hard to watch everything, but I'll look at them. And at the end of this slide, you can see that in both guided reading and strategy groups, the students are going to be reading silently, the teacher's going to be listening in, and there are specific strategies that are discussed and practiced in both types of groups. All right, so let me go to my next little slide here. We're almost to the end of my thing here. Tonight's is a little bit longer. Hopefully you guys are getting some out of this. And again, I'm going to be giving you all of these slides. All right, so my recommendation, this is my last page of notes tonight. My recommendation for you is to use both, to use strategy groups and guided reading groups. One thing that I really think is awesome to help you with your strategy groups, and a super powerful thing to do with your kids that doesn't take that much work at all, is to take a status of the class at the end of your mini lesson. Let me show you what that looks like. I made this for you guys to have tonight. This is a status of the class. And basically what you would do at the end of your mini lesson is ask each student to tell you what they plan to read or work on during independent time. So if you just did a mini lesson on understanding characters and how they act in a story, say for example, and you want the kids to go back and work independently, read their own stories, and you want them to write a little something about the characters, all you have to do is say, okay, tell me what book you're reading and what character you're going to write about. Say one thing about what you're going to write about. And you call each student one at a time. And I know that sounds like it takes a lot of time, but really it takes like 10, 15 seconds per student. And then you mark off if they are telling you they understand what to do during independent time. You mark it off. They're good to go. But the ones who look at you like deer in headlights, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing during independent time, you check them in the other box. And those are the kids who you know you want to see in a strategy group right away. So your strategy group is going to be immediately following your mini lesson based on your status of the class and what your students are telling you they can do as readers. This does so many things. And the biggest thing it can do is it follows immediately your mini lesson into a targeted reteaching in a small strategy group. And it holds students accountable for their learning. During that whole group lesson, they know, after you do this a couple times, they know that you're going to be asking them what their plans are during independent time. So they have to be prepared to answer you. If not, they're going to be, not that it's a bad thing to be pulled into a strategy group, but they're going to have to get a little bit more instruction from you. So they're going to be really paying a lot more attention during your lesson, and they're going to begin to know that you'll be asking for this plan of action before they begin working, which is a really, really powerful thing to do. So use this to help you figure out who you need to meet in a strategy group for 5-10 minutes. It should not be more than 10 minutes because you're just going to do another example, another little reteaching, some thinking aloud with a book, and they can bring their books as well. And it can be something really quick like that. And then let me put this one right back up just for a minute because we're almost done here. A couple other things. Any students who still seem confused on how to transition their learning from the whole group to the independent, you can pull for a strategy group. Use the strategy groups for writing as well. This is really powerful to do a strategy group during writing, especially if they're about to go off from writer's workshop mini lesson into writing independently. And you take a little status of the class and you say, okay, tell me what you're going to start writing at right away. And if you're in the revising stage, what are you going to work on revising right away? And if they can't tell you, then you know you can pull a strategy group for writing and have them bring their writing to the group and say, okay, I noticed all of you seemed like you were a little bit confused on what you're going to get started with writing today. So I wanted to take a minute to help you. Let's talk about where we're at and just go from there. That's a really powerful thing to do during the writing workshop as well. Keep working on guided reading groups, keeping in mind that the learning is active and you are there as a guide, not simply just to give the kids answers. We want them to develop their own network of strategies, not just learning how to respond to a question. We want them to be creating their own. So help them develop that in guided reading groups as well. So you can see how a strategy group can be pretty quick, and then you can move into your guided reading groups. You don't have to do strategy groups every day, but if you see a small group that's like, yeah, they're not getting it today, pull that group and do a little strategy group. I asked some people in my curriculum group if they had any questions for me about this topic, and I got some questions back I thought I would answer right away. Here's one. Is it possible to do both strategy and guided reading groups? And I think I answered that question. Yes, it's totally possible. And with all things in teaching, there is no cut and dry right answer. Like you should do strategy groups at 9 to 9:15 every day for 5 minutes each, 3 groups. You should do, I can't tell you because our job is so evolving on a day-to-day basis, sometimes minute by minute. We're responding to our kids all the time. So we want to make sure that we're available for that flexibility. So be flexible. Some days you might do a strategy group. Some days you might just do your guided reading, and that's okay. It's totally up to the needs of your students that you need to address. And then here was another question that I got. Let's see. How can you schedule to do both strategy and guided reading groups? And again, the answer to that is I always have a schedule, a plan in mind as a teacher, but I'm always prepared for it to go completely into left field because I know I want to keep that flexibility for my kids. So I might plan for 3 guided reading groups in a day, but if I see a small group of kids that really didn't master the mini lesson and are going to go back to their desks and not do what they're supposed to do, and I know that, instead of just letting it happen, I'm going to pull a strategy group and I'm going to work with them again. And maybe I only see 2 guided reading groups that day, and that's okay. So I can have a schedule, but it doesn't have to be set in stone. And I'm not going to beat myself up if I don't see all of my groups for guided reading that day, because I know what I did in that strategy group was super powerful for those kids and it covered an immediate need. So that's my answer to that one. And then I have one more question. And if you have a question, you can ask it too, and I'll try and answer it. How often do strategy groups meet versus guided reading groups? Usually I only do a strategy group once in that day if I need to. And it's right after that status of the class, right after like somebody, a little group doesn't understand something. Now, if I only have one or two kids confused, I'll just go conference with them. So I'll conference with them, and then that's good. I don't even need to do a strategy group with them. So it depends on the day, but usually I only have about one. And let me pull that down. Now I wanted to tell you too, I'm going to give you the link in just a second, but I do have a guided reading webinar that's coming up in just a half an hour. So if you want to learn all about guided reading, join the webinar. There is a link. Let me see. I can put the link in for you to join the webinar. Bingo webinars, that's fun. So you can join the webinar by going to jenbengalwebinars.com. You still have time to do this. It's a half an hour away. It's a free webinar. You get a certificate and all my notes for showing up. And I break down guided reading. I walk through the entire process of teaching guided reading. So if you want to watch that webinar, it's happening live in a half an hour. I'm not going to be doing it again, I think, until July. So check that out if you want to do that. And then the other thing I need to give you is your freebie with all my notes from tonight. And then I'll hang out for just a minute to answer some questions, but I do have to head out to get ready for my webinar too, though. Thanks for all the sweet comments, you guys. I really appreciate it. Aw, Lindsay said, that is a great webinar. Thank you. It's a very popular one. Hi, Lorraine. I'm putting your name up there. Hi. Isn't that fun how I can put your names up there? Barbara, she said, what is a strategy group and a guided reading group? I'm late getting on. So Barbara, I can show you this slide, which you will actually get a copy of this. So this one's a really good one to take a look at. When you download that link, take a look at that because that breaks it apart. I shared it, and you can always watch the replay too to see what I talked about. Jody, hi Jody. Hi, Jody from Miami. She said, what would your ideal schedule look like? I talk about that in my my reading and writing workshop webinar. And for me, you want to know my dream ideally, and I had this, was 3 hours of language arts. I had an hour of reading workshop, an hour of writing workshop, and an hour of language arts, which I did all my vocabulary, spelling, and word study and grammar and stuff in that hour. That's the best schedule. I can get away with a 45-minute workshop each, but other than that, it's pretty tough. That's my ideal, I would say, for sure. Brooke says, how do you handle the flexibility of these groups when you have other teachers coming in to work with small groups? Oh, I would be so excited if I had other teachers helping me because that's like a double dose. When I was pushing into a 5th grade classroom, we would both be doing guided reading groups at the same time, which was amazing because we got to meet with so many groups. So what I would do, Brooke, is I would, first of all, train, have my other teachers prepared to know that the first 10 minutes or so after my mini lesson, I'm likely going to be reteaching in a small group setting, a strategy group if I needed to, or something like that. But I would just collaborate with the other teachers. I think that would be an awesome opportunity. Terry has a good question. She said, how do you track your formative assessments? I love formative assessments, and I'm actually going to do an entire talk on formative assessments in the fall. But how I track them is, I love binders. So I keep track of my students' work in binders. And I bounce back between having the binder with each student in it and having them have their own section that I can track in. And then I also have like a class record sheet on the front of my binder. And that's a loaded question, but I'm going to be talking about formative assessments in the fall. So you'll love that. Thanks, Stephanie. Lisa says, I also did not register. How can I get the handouts? Oh, these handouts are free. These are in the comment section. So let me see if I can pull them up. This is a Facebook Live, and a Facebook Live, here they are. That Google Drive right there will have all of these notes in it. So you can just get that. You don't have to register for anything. If you want to go to the webinar, the more formal webinar, that's the one that you need to register for, and you can do that right there at jenbangowebinars.com. So you can register for that now. What will happen is you'll send you the link that you need to join the webinar in a half an hour, and that's all you need. So you just need to click that link to join the webinar, and you'll be in. It's pretty sweet. So I'm going to have to head out because I have to go get ready for the webinar. So if any of you are joining me, I'm excited that you're coming. It's a really popular one, and it's a really good one for guided reading. So if you teach guided reading at all, definitely want to think about joining. If you've been in it before and you want to just get a refresher, you can certainly come too. All right, hopefully you enjoyed this talk. The next one is going to be, let me put this back up. The next one is going to be next week. I can't read it because it's really small for me. It looks like the 27th. I think it's on Tuesday. Yeah, we'll go with that. So you can see the calendar here. Join me again at 6:30 p.m. Central right here on my Facebook page for another great talk and some notes and any other freebies that I'll put together for that talk. Thanks for hanging out with me, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this talk on guided reading versus strategy groups and got some ideas out of it. Have a great night, everybody, and maybe I'll see you in the webinar. Bye.